You know that feeling when you run into an idea, and it seems simple maybe on the surface, but the more you dig into it, the more complex, even kind of contradictory it feels.
Yeah, definitely. Like peeling an onion, but maybe the layers don't quite line up.
Exactly. Well, today we're really plunging into one just like that, something you might have, bumped up against if you've ever looked into Buddhist thought. And Atta, this idea of not self and then rebirth, seems like they shouldn't work together, right?
Totally. It's a classic sticking point.
Yeah.
And for this deep dive, we're lucky we have this fantastic resource, a transcription of a lecture by Buddhadāsa Bhikkhu, a really insightful teacher.
Yeah, from back in January 1988. So we've got his perspective to guide us.
And our goal today, especially for listeners who, want that clear understanding without getting bogged down, is to try and untangle this relationship between anatta and rebirth.
Right. Move past that initial wait, what moment.
Exactly. Get to something a bit more nuanced.
Because the core question, it really is a head scratcher, isn't it?
Mhm.
How can you have rebirth, this cycle continuing, if there's no permanent self, no soul making the trip?
That's the million-dollar question.
That's the puzzle. And we're going to look at it through Buddhadasa's eyes today. Okay, so where does he start? How does this feeling of self even pop up?
Well, what's really interesting and kind of fundamental to his point is that this feeling of self isn't something we, consciously cook up. It's basic.
Basic how?
It's almost an automatic survival thing. He says it's present in all living organisms. That fundamental sense of me helps navigate, spot danger, find food.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. An instinct.
Right. But then, and this is key, Buddhadasa points out, it doesn't just stop there. That initial instinct gets amplified, built upon
How so?
through conditioning, all sorts of conditioning. From when we're tiny, we're taught about self,
Yeah.
education, culture, religion.
Parents, teacher,
Parents, teachers, society, they all reinforce this idea of a separate me.
and language too, right? He
Yeah.
mentions that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's baked right into how we talk. Almost every language has words for self, ego, soul. These ideas are just there in the structure of how we think and speak.
So this constant reinforcement, it naturally leads people to think there's something lasting there, an eternal bit.
Precisely. Buddhadasa points to the Upanishads in India, ancient texts teaching about a self that goes through birth after birth, getting purified along the way.
And that idea spread pretty far, didn't it? He mentions it even reached Thailand before Buddhism did.
Yeah, it found fertile ground, resonated with existing beliefs about spirits or essences.
Interesting.
And he flags the Tantra tradition in India as maybe the peak of this self-belief. Concepts like Brahman, Paramatman, this ultimate universal self.
So the crucial thing to get is that when the Buddha came along, believing in a permanent self wasn't some fringe idea.
Not at all. It was the mainstream, the sophisticated view, the cutting edge, spiritually speaking.
Okay, so against that background, the Buddha's teaching of anatta, not self, that must have landed like a bomb.
Absolutely revolutionary. Buddhadasa really stresses how different it was, a complete departure. And he gives two main reasons why the Buddha taught it.
Okay, yeah. Why go against the grain so strongly?
First, Buddhadasa says, the Buddha saw that this belief in Atta, in a permanent self, it just wasn't true. It didn't match reality as he experienced it.
So fundamentally wrong.
Fundamentally wrong. And second, and this is huge for understanding, the human condition.
Mm.
He taught that this very belief in self is the root cause of all our suffering.
Dukkha.
Dukkha, yeah.
Right.
All the stress, the anxiety, the dissatisfaction, it comes from clinging to this illusion of I.
Wow. And Buddhadasa mentions there might have been hints of not self before, but they always kind of circled back.
Yeah, little inklings maybe, but they always kept some core Atta, some essence. The Buddha's move was the radical one, getting rid of it entirely.
Okay, so how does this feeling develop then? If it starts as instinct but becomes this big philosophical belief, Buddhadasa breaks it down.
He does. He outlines sort of three stages, which helps clarify it.
Okay, walk us through them.
First, as we said, that instinct, basic I-ness for survival. But he adds, it's based on ignorance, really, a lack of full understanding, even though it's natural.
Right. Functional, but not the ultimate truth.
Exactly. Then, stage two, infancy. The baby starts interacting, feeling pleasant things, unpleasant things, likes, dislikes. This lack of, mature wisdom strengthens that feeling of me at the center of it all.
Ah, so experiences start to solidify the me and mine.
Right. And then stage three is where the cultural conditioning really kicks in hard. Parents, school, religion, they all hammer home this idea of a fixed self or soul.
And it becomes a conviction.
A deep conviction, sometimes religious. So you see, it's layered. instinct, then early experience, then social reinforcement. It's not just one simple thing.
It's like a snowball rolling downhill, gathering more and more self.
That's a good way to put it. And Buddhadāsa makes another really sharp point about language here.
Yeah.
Because self is so embedded in language, it's almost impossible not to reinforce the idea, even when you're trying to talk about not self.
Huh. Yeah, you have to use the word self to say there's no self. It's a bit of a trap.
It is. And he acknowledges that. Even in Buddhism, the word Anattā, self, pops up sometimes.
But he says it means something different in that context.
Crucially different. He says when Buddhism uses self, it always implies a self that is actually not self.
Okay, so like when the Buddha says self is the refuge of self.
Exactly. He's not saying some permanent I finds refuge.
Yeah.
Buddhadasa explains it means this self, this collection of changing bits that isn't a permanent self, needs wisdom to see its own lack of inherent selfness.
Ah, okay. The not self needs to realize it's not self.
Precisely. And that realization is the refuge, the end of suffering. Understand that distinction is really key.
Okay, so we've got the Anatta camp belief in a real self, and the Buddhist Anatta view self is not self. But didn't you say Buddhadasa mentioned a third position?
He did. Nihilism. The Natthikadihi. These folks take it even further. They deny anything exists at all.
Whoa, so not just no self, but nothing.
Pretty much. No self, no world, no reality to even talk about. Just nothingness.
Okay, so 3 lanes. Eternalism, real self, the middle way, not self, and nihilism, nothing exists. He uses some Pali terms for these, helps keep them straight.
Yeah, they're useful. Sathadadithi for eternalism, that's one extreme, like positive belief in self. Natthikadithi for nihilism, the other extreme, negative denial. And samadhithi, right understanding, the Buddhist middle way, is anatta.
Got it. Sata natika sama.
And it's super important, Buddhadasa stresses this, not to mix up nihilism, natthikadithi, with the Buddhist idea of sunyata.
Right. Emptiness or voidness. They sound similar but aren't.
Totally different. This is crucial. Sunyata doesn't mean nothing exists. It means things do exist, but they are empty of inherent independent selfhood.
Like your wave example earlier. The wave exists, but it's empty of some separate wave self apart from the water.
Exactly that. Phenomena arise, they exist, but they're void of selfness. Nihilism, which he also calls natthita, the state of nothingness, denies existence altogether. Sunyata affirms existence, but denies inherent self within it.
Okay, big difference. So anatta, sunyata, and he mentioned another one, tatat.
Tata, yeah. Thusness or suchness.
They all point to things existing, but without a permanent owner or core.
Precisely. Not self, void of self, just as they are. They exist, they function, but without a self involved. Now, to nail it down even more, what is anatta, practically speaking?
Right. We know what it isn't. It isn't nihilism. It isn't eternalism. But what is not self?
He starts simple. Body and mind are anatta.
Okay.
The body breathes, digests, walks. It does its thing without needing a little self-driver inside.
Like biological machinery.
Yeah. And the mind thinks, feels, perceives. These are functions happening, processes.
Mm-hmm.
But no permanent self is required for them to run.
Like the computer analogy, hardware and software running without a tiny person inside pulling levers?
That's a good way to visualize it. Then he refines it with the 5 aggregates, the khandhas.
Right, the deeper breakdown of experience.
Yeah, form the body, feeling pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, perception, recognizing things, mental formations, intentions, volitions, habits, and consciousness awareness itself.
Okay, the 5 components.
And Buddhadasa says each one of these individually is also anatta. Form is not self, feeling is not self, consciousness is not self. They all just arise and cease based on conditions.
So whether you look at the big picture body and mind or zoom in on the 5 aggregates, same conclusion.
Same conclusion. No inherent fixed self anywhere in the mix, and he extends that to life itself.
Life is anatta.
Yeah, the whole shebang. Whether you define it as body, mind, or the khandhas working together, the totality of life is without a permanent self.
He even tackles setta, right? Mind or consciousness. That seems like the prime candidate for self.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But nope. He says even citta, the experiencing faculty, the thing that knows, it's also anatta. It functions, it knows, that's its nature, its thusness. But there's no separate self embedded in that knowing.
Man, he really covers all the bases where you might try to hide a self. And he takes it all the way to nibbana.
Right to the top.
Yeah.
Even nibbana, the ultimate goal, the cessation of suffering, is anatta.
Oh wait, nibbana is not self. How does that work?
It's real, it's genuine liberation, but it isn't a self and isn't attained by a self in the conventional sense. It's the extinguishing of the conditions that create the illusion of self and suffering. It's not like merging with some cosmic self, as some other traditions might see it.
Wow. Okay, that really flips the script on enlightenment. He uses an analogy, you said the closing grass.
Yeah, it's a great simple illustration. You know that sensitive plant, touch me not, that folds its leaves?
Yeah.
An animist might say, oh, the plant's self is shy or scared. But Buddhadasa says, no, it's just a mechanism. Causes and conditions make the leaves close. No self needed. It contrasts that natural mechanistic view with the self-based explanation.
Okay, so if there's no self, just these interacting processes and mechanisms,
Yeah,
what is a person then? What am I?
good question. Buddhadasa explains a person is just a temporary combination, a compounding of all these not-self bits, body, mind, feelings, thoughts, elements, all coming together for a time.
Like a temporary assembly.
Exactly. And since all the parts are not self, the whole assembly, the person, is also not self.
Like borrowing parts to build a car, but there's no permanent carness independent of the parts and no owner.
Precisely. Which leads directly to the next big question. Action and consequence. Karma.
Yeah, if there's no person, no self, who acts? Who gets the result? How does morality even work?
It's the crucial ethical question within this framework, isn't it?
Totally. How does he handle that?
He explains that actions, intentions, volitions, they arise from the not-self mind and body, conditioned phenomena. And the results, the reactions, the experiences that follow, they are experienced by a subsequent different but connected, not self-mind-body process.
So it's like ripples in a pond. One action creates a ripple, which affects the water later, but it's not the same water particle experiencing it.
That's a decent analogy. It's a continuous stream of cause and effect, conditioning playing out moment to moment. There's continuity, there's consequence, but no fixed agent doing it or receiving it. Think of a flame passing from one candle to the next. There's connection, but it's not the same flame.
Okay, process, not entity. Which brings us smack back to rebirth, the big one. If there's no self, what gets reborn?
Buddhadasa finds the question itself framed that way, kind of ridiculous, as he puts it, once you really grasp anatta.
Why ridiculous?
Because if there's no permanent atta, no fixed self right now in this life,
Right.
then what could possibly be there to get reborn? The premise of the question assumes the thing, a self that Anatta denies.
Ah, okay. So the question, what gets reborn, already smuggles in the idea of a something that travels.
Exactly. If you accept Anatta, the question dissolves.
So for Buddhadasa, the common idea of reincarnation, same soul, new body, that's out.
Completely out. He's very clear. In Buddhism, there is birth, jati, the arising of phenomena, the start of a conditioned process. But there is no rebirth, Buddhabhava, in the sense of a permanent self-hopping bodies. Every birth is a new arising.
Okay. New arising, not continuation of the same entity. He breaks down birth into different types, doesn't he, to clarify this?
Yes, 3 kinds, which helps untangle things. First, physical birth, obvious one, womb to tomb.
Got it.
Second, mental birth. This is the arising of I thoughts, I am, I want. This is mine. Every time the ego flares up due to attachment or clinging, that's a mental birth.
Oh, okay. Happening all the time then.
Constantly, moment to moment for most people. And third, the birth of sense experience.
How does that work?
Whatever the senses, eyes, ears, nose, etc. function, whenever seeing happens, hearing happens. That specific instance of sense contact and the resulting experience is a birth. And when it stops, that's a cessation, a quenching.
So seeing this cup is a birth, then looking away is a death of that specific seeing.
In a way, yes. Each sensory event is a fresh arising, not the same continuous self doing the seeing. He links this to a detailed teaching on the sense bases, the ayatanas, showing this constant flicker of arising and ceasing.
Okay, so birth isn't just the big physical event. It's happening constantly on mental and sensory levels, too.
Exactly. Understanding that makes the idea of a single entity being reborn seem less plausible. It's constant flux, constant arising and ceasing.
Now, there's a common idea, maybe a misunderstanding, that consciousness itself, vinyaka, is what gets reborn. Does Buddhadasa address that?
He does, directly. He brings up a specific case where a monk taught that vijnana transmigrates, and the Buddha corrected him very strongly.
So the Buddha himself refuted that idea.
Explicitly, according to this account, vijnana, like the other aggregates, is conditioned and not self. It doesn't travel.
That's important, because sometimes you do hear interpretations that lean that way.
Right. And Buddhadasa acknowledges that some scriptures might use everyday language, talking about a person being reborn, just for convention's sake.
But the core teaching is what matters.
That's his emphasis. Don't get stuck on conventional language if it seems to contradict the fundamental principle of anatta. Examine it, Find the truth for yourself. Don't just blindly believe interpretations.
Okay. So after dismantling the idea of a self and traditional rebirth, where does Buddhadasa leave us? What's the main point?
He brings it right back to the heart of the Buddha's message. Dukkha and the end of dukkha. Suffering and its cessation.
That's the core business.
That's the core business. He argues that ultimately the whole debate about rebirth is secondary. Whether you call the arising of suffering birth or rebirth, it's still dukkha. The real issue is how to stop it.
And Anatta is the key to stopping it.
Exactly. Understanding not-self is the path to seeing how suffering arises from clinging to a non-existent I, and how letting go of that clinging leads to cessation. The rest, the details of what happens after death. It's interesting, maybe, but academic compared to solving the problem of suffering right here, right now.
So a full grasp of Anatta makes the rebirth question kind of irrelevant, or at least resolves it.
That's his conclusion. Understand Anatta properly, and you'll see there's no self to be reborn, making traditional reincarnation impossible. The focus shifts entirely.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive based on Buddhadasa, the big takeaway is that Anatta, not self, completely changes the game regarding birth and death.
Yeah, it pulls the rug out from under the idea of a permanent self making the journey.
Making traditional rebirth illogical within that framework. Instead, it's about this continuous impersonal process of arising and ceasing.
Driven by conditions. And the ultimate aim isn't a better rebirth for me, but ending the whole cycle of suffering by realizing there is no permanent me in the first place.
And digging into this, exploring anatta and how it relates to birth and death, it definitely sparks more thought, doesn't it? Which is what happens when you really engage with these deep ideas.
Absolutely. It's not meant to be just an intellectual exercise, but something that shifts your perspective.
Right. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening to chew on. If this idea of a fixed, continuous self really is an illusion, as Buddhadasa argues, what does that actually mean for how you understand your own identity day to day, your sense of responsibility, your connection to everything else?
Yeah, what changes if the I isn't a solid thing, but more like a process, a verb rather than a noun?
Exactly. That's something to sit with, a personal exploration sparked by this ancient teaching of not self.